The hands resist him. In 1972, artist Bill Stoneham created a painting that would later become one of the most disturbing artworks ever associated with a curse. The piece shows a young boy standing beside a life-size doll in front of a glass door. Behind that door, dozens of pale hands press outward from the darkness. At first glance, the scene looks symbolic, but the longer people look at it, the more the image begins to feel wrong. The boy's expression is strangely empty. The doll's face looks almost human, yet completely lifeless, and the hands behind the glass suggest something waiting on the other side. The painting first appeared in a Beverly Hills gallery during the early 1970s. Soon after the exhibition, several people connected to the artwork died within a short period of time. Actor John Marley, who once owned the painting, passed away not long after acquiring it. The art critic who had written about the exhibition also died soon after. None of these events were officially connected to the painting, but the timing created the first rumors that something about the artwork carried an unusual reputation. For many years, the painting disappeared from public view. Then, decades later, it suddenly resurfaced through an online auction listing. The sellers claimed they had placed the painting in their daughter's room. Soon after, the child began reporting something disturbing. According to her, the figures inside the painting moved during the night. Sometimes the doll appeared to shift position. Other times the boy seemed to be stepping out of the frame. The parents installed a motion-sensitive camera in the room. The device reportedly triggered multiple times during the night, even when nothing could be seen moving. When the image spread across the internet, thousands of viewers reported an immediate sense of discomfort. Some people said the painting made them feel watched. Others reported headaches or anxiety after looking at the image for too long. Psychologists suggested that the reaction could be explained by visual tension within the composition. The human brain struggles with figures that appear almost real, but not fully alive. The doll's face sits inside that unsettling space between human and object. The hands behind the glass create another psychological pressure point, as if something is trapped behind a barrier that should never open. Bill Stoneham later explained the painting as a personal metaphor. The boy represented himself as a child. The doll represented a guide into the world of dreams. The glass door symbolized the boundary between reality and imagination. From the artist's perspective, the image was never meant to be frightening, but the painting continues to produce the same reaction from viewers decades later. And that leaves one question investigators still cannot answer clearly. If the figures inside the painting are nothing more than symbolism, why do so many people describe the same feeling when they look at it? The feeling that the hands behind the glass are not just painted there, but waiting. The Busby Stoop chair. In a quiet town in North Yorkshire, England, a simple wooden chair hangs several feet above the floor inside a museum. Visitors are not allowed to sit on it. Staff are careful to make sure no one touches it. The reason is not because the chair is fragile or historically valuable. The reason is that for nearly 3 centuries, the chair was believed to carry a deadly curse. The story begins in the early 1700s with a man named Thomas Busby. Busby was known locally as a violent and unpredictable criminal. In 1702, he murdered his father-in-law during a drunken argument inside the family inn. Busby was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. According to local accounts, shortly before he was taken to the gallows, Busby made a final statement about the chair he had always sat in at the inn. He declared that anyone who dared sit in that chair after him would suffer a terrible fate. At first, the statement sounded like the bitter threat of a condemned man, but over time, strange patterns began to emerge. People who sat in the chair reportedly died soon after. Some died in accidents, others died in sudden and unexplained circumstances. The stories accumulated slowly through the decades. Soldiers stationed nearby during World War II reportedly challenged each other to sit in the chair as a joke. Several of those soldiers later died in combat. Local residents eventually stopped treating the story as a harmless legend. The chair gained a reputation as something dangerous to test. Yet, curiosity continued to draw people toward it. Throughout the 20th century, visitors to the inn occasionally tried to prove the curse wrong. According to reports repeated by locals, many of those individuals later died in traffic accidents or workplace disasters, not long after sitting in the chair. Whether coincidence or not, the pattern created fear strong enough that the building's owners eventually decided the chair should never be used again. When the inn closed, the chair was transferred to the Thirsk Museum. The museum staff faced a problem. The chair was an important piece of local folklore, but allowing people to sit in it felt irresponsible. Their solution was unusual. Instead of placing the chair on the floor like other exhibits, they mounted it high on the wall. Today, the chair hangs several feet above the ground, completely impossible to sit on. No official report has ever confirmed that the chair caused any deaths. Historians argue that many of the stories grew through exaggeration over time, but even skeptics admit something unusual about the way the legend has survived for more than 300 years. Generations of people, independent of each other, have repeated the same warning: do not sit in Busby's chair. Because if the curse was nothing more than a dying man's anger, the chair would simply be another piece of antique furniture. Instead, it hangs on a museum wall like an object that still needs to be contained: the Annabelle Doll. In 1970, a nursing student in Connecticut received a Raggedy Ann doll as a gift. At first, it looked completely harmless. The doll had a soft cloth body, stitched smile, and bright red yarn hair. It resembled thousands of other children's toys sold across America. But within a few weeks of arriving in the apartment, the doll began to develop a reputation that would eventually turn it into one of the most famous cursed objects in modern paranormal history. The student and her roommate began noticing small changes. The doll would appear in different positions than where they had left it. Sometimes it would move from the couch to a chair. Other times, it appeared lying face down on the floor, even though no one had touched it. At first, they assumed they were simply forgetting where they had placed it. But the incidents continued. Eventually, the movements became more difficult to explain. Then new details began appearing. Small handwritten notes were found inside the apartment. The messages were written on parchment paper that the roommates did not own. The notes simply read, "Help me," or "Help us." Neither student claimed to have written them. The doll itself was often discovered holding the paper. Concerned by the growing pattern of strange events, the roommates contacted a psychic medium. During the session, the medium claimed that the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins was attached to the doll. According to the story, the child had died near the property years earlier and was seeking comfort through the object. Feeling sympathy for the supposed spirit, the students agreed to let the doll remain in their home. That decision did not calm the situation. Instead, the disturbances escalated. A male friend who frequently visited the apartment became openly hostile toward the doll. He insisted the story was nonsense and claimed the object felt evil. One night, he reportedly woke up unable to move, feeling as if something was pressing on his chest. Later that day, he was found bleeding from several deep scratches across his torso. The wounds appeared suddenly and healed unusually quickly over the following days. At that point, the roommates contacted paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. After examining the situation, the Warrens reached a very different conclusion from the psychic. According to them, the doll was not inhabited by a child spirit at all. Instead, they believed the object was being manipulated by a non-human entity attempting to gain influence over the people in the apartment. The Warrens removed the doll from the home and placed it inside a secured glass case in their occult museum. A warning sign was attached to the display, advising visitors not to touch or provoke the object. Over the years, the doll became surrounded by dozens of stories. Visitors who mocked it reportedly experienced accidents shortly afterward. One well-known story describes a motorcycle rider who laughed at the doll before leaving the museum. Hours later, he was involved in a fatal crash. Whether these events were coincidence or something more disturbing has never been proven, but one fact remains difficult to ignore. Unlike most dolls kept as collectibles, Annabelle is not displayed openly. It remains locked inside a sealed case, as if the safest place for it is somewhere it cannot move: the unlucky mummy case. Inside the British Museum's vast Egyptian collection is an artifact that has carried one of the strangest reputations in museum history. It is not a full mummy. It is a decorated coffin lid, catalogued as EA22542. The object once covered the body of an Egyptian woman from the 22nd dynasty. The carvings are elegant and precise, showing the figure of the woman with calm, symmetrical features and traditional funerary symbols. Yet, for more than a century, this artifact has been surrounded by a persistent rumor. Many people know it by a different name: the unlucky mummy. The story began in the late 19th century when the coffin lid was brought from Egypt to England. Soon after its arrival, several strange incidents were reported among the people connected to it. According to early accounts, one of the first owners suffered severe financial misfortune. shortly after acquiring the piece. Another individual, involved in transporting the artifact, reportedly died unexpectedly. Journalists who wrote about the object were later linked to accidents or illness. None of the reports were officially confirmed as being caused by the artifact itself. Yet the stories began to spread rapidly through newspapers and popular culture. As the rumors grew, the object developed a reputation far beyond the museum world. Some versions of the story claimed photographers who tried to capture the coffin lid later suffered strange injuries. Others claimed that museum staff felt uncomfortable working near it late at night. Over time, the artifact became one of the most famous cursed objects ever associated with a museum collection. One particularly dramatic rumor claimed the object had even been connected to the sinking of the Titanic. According to that version of the legend, the coffin lid had been secretly shipped across the Atlantic aboard the doomed vessel. The story suggested the ancient curse had followed the artifact onto the ship. Historians later confirmed that the coffin lid never left the British Museum and had nothing to do with the disaster. But the fact that such a rumor spread so widely showed how deeply the legend had taken hold. Museum officials have repeatedly stated that there is no evidence the object is cursed. They describe the stories as Victorian-era folklore that grew from sensational newspaper reporting. The coffin lid itself has never displayed any physical anomaly or unexplained event under controlled museum conditions. Yet the reputation has never completely disappeared. Visitors who learn about the legend often report feeling uneasy while standing in front of the artifact. Something about the calm expression carved into the face seems strangely watchful. The painted eyes appear to follow the viewer from different angles. Rationally, it is only an illusion created by ancient craftsmanship. But the legend surrounding the coffin lid reveals something interesting about human psychology. When an object has traveled through thousands of years of burial, excavation, transport, and ownership, people begin to wonder what else may have traveled with it. Not a spirit in the supernatural sense, but a history of death, ritual, and belief, powerful enough to shape the way every new generation reacts to it. And that may be the real mystery of the unlucky mummy. The artifact itself has never moved. It has never harmed anyone directly. Yet for more than 100 years, the stories around it have refused to disappear, as if some objects do not need to act in order to influence the people who encounter them. The Koh-i-Noor Diamond. Few objects in history carry a reputation as heavy as the Koh-i-Noor. Today, the diamond sits among the British crown jewels, locked behind thick glass and constant security. It is one of the most famous gemstones on Earth, but long before it became a royal symbol, the stone was already surrounded by a legend that many rulers quietly feared. The name Koh-i-Noor means mountain of light. The diamond was discovered centuries ago in the mines of India and quickly became associated with imperial power. Kings, emperors, and conquerors fought wars to possess it. Whoever held the diamond controlled enormous wealth and authority. But according to an old legend recorded in South Asian history, the Koh-i-Noor carried a warning. The stone would bring power to whoever owned it, but it would also bring disaster to the men who tried to rule with it. Throughout its long history, the diamond passed through the hands of several powerful rulers. Nearly every transfer was connected to conflict. Empires collapsed, kings were overthrown, entire dynasties lost control of their kingdoms shortly after acquiring the stone. Some rulers were assassinated, others were forced into exile. In many cases, the diamond changed owners not through peaceful inheritance, but through invasion and conquest. The pattern was impossible to ignore. By the time the diamond eventually reached the British Empire in the 19th century, the legend surrounding it had become widely known. Historical advisors studying the stone reportedly noticed the same detail repeated through generations of accounts. Every male ruler who possessed the Koh-i-Noor experienced severe misfortune. After the diamond was presented to Queen Victoria, something unusual happened. The stone was never again worn by a reigning king. Instead, it was placed in crowns worn by female members of the royal family. Some historians believe this decision was purely symbolic. Others believe the royal court was aware of the long-standing superstition surrounding the gem and quietly chose the safest possible approach. Officially, the British monarchy has never acknowledged the existence of any curse connected to the Koh-i-Noor. To them, the diamond is simply a historic artifact, a reminder of imperial history and royal ceremony. Yet the legend continues to circulate among historians and cultural scholars. Because the Koh-i-Noor is not associated with one tragic incident or a single mysterious event. Its reputation comes from something much larger. Across centuries, every man who tried to rule while wearing the stone eventually lost everything that power had given him. Wars, betrayals, assassinations, revolutions. The diamond survived them all. Today it rests safely behind museum glass, perfectly cut and brilliantly illuminated for visitors to admire. But its history raises an uncomfortable question that still follows the stone wherever it is displayed. If the Koh-i-Noor is nothing more than a beautiful piece of carbon, why did so many rulers fight to possess it? And why did so many of them fall soon after they did? The Black Orlov Diamond. Among the world's most mysterious gemstones, few carry a darker reputation than the Black Orlov. Unlike most famous diamonds, this stone does not shine with bright clarity. It is deep black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. The unusual color alone would have made it remarkable. But the story attached to it is what turned the Black Orlov into one of the most feared jewels in history. According to legend, the diamond was originally part of a sacred statue in southern India. The statue represented a Hindu deity and stood inside a temple where it had remained for generations. The stone was said to form one of the statue's eyes. At some point in the 19th century, the diamond was removed from the statue and taken out of the temple. The removal was not described as a trade or purchase. It was described as theft. Soon after the diamond entered the international market, strange stories began to appear. The stone eventually came into the possession of several wealthy owners, many of whom reportedly suffered tragic endings. One of the earliest figures linked to the diamond was a Russian princess named Nadia Orlov, from whom the stone would later take its name. According to widely repeated accounts, she jumped to her death from a building in Rome shortly after owning the diamond. Years later, another woman connected to the stone reportedly died in a similar way. The two incidents became the foundation of the diamond's dark reputation. Newspapers began referring to it as a cursed gem, claiming that the theft from the temple had awakened a powerful spiritual punishment. Whether those deaths were connected to the diamond has never been proven, yet the stories followed the stone wherever it went. In the mid-20th century, the diamond came into the hands of a New York jeweler named Charles Winson. Winson was aware of the rumors surrounding the stone. Instead of hiding the legend, he made an unusual decision. The diamond was cut into smaller pieces and redesigned into a necklace. According to Winson, breaking the stone into new forms would weaken whatever curse had been attached to it. After the redesign, the Black Orlov began appearing in high society jewelry exhibitions. It was displayed at major events and eventually became known as one of the most unusual diamonds ever shown to the public. The gem now weighs around 67.5 carats and remains one of the largest known black diamonds. Officially, experts describe the curse as nothing more than a dramatic story created by newspapers and collectors. There is no scientific evidence that gemstones can carry supernatural forces, but the Black Orlov remains different from other famous diamonds in one important way. Most historic gems are remembered for the wealth they represent. This one is remembered for the fear that followed it, because the central question surrounding the Black Orlov has never truly disappeared. If the stone was simply a rare geological formation, why did its reputation grow so quickly after it was removed from a sacred statue? And why did the man who owned it later decide the safest thing to do was cut the diamond apart, as if he believed something inside it needed to be broken? The Conjured Chest. In the collections of the Kentucky Historical Society sits a wooden chest that, at first glance, appears completely ordinary. It is small, dark, and built with simple craftsmanship. No precious metals, no elaborate carvings, no signs that it once belonged to royalty or religious ceremony. Yet the object carries a reputation so unsettling that many people refer to it simply as the Conjured Chest. The story of the chest begins in rural Kentucky during the 19th century. According to historical records preserved with the artifact, the chest originally belonged to a local family who claimed that a curse had been placed upon it. The details of that curse are not fully documented, but family accounts describe a series of disturbing experiences that followed anyone who kept the chest inside their home. Owners reported strange sounds coming from the box during the night. At times, it was described as scratching or tapping from inside, even though the chest was empty. Other reports described sudden illness or severe misfortune affecting members of the household soon after the object was brought inside. The incidents were never documented as supernatural events, but the pattern of fear around the chest continued to grow within the community. Over time, the family became convinced the object had been deliberately conjured, a term used in Appalachian folklore to describe an item intentionally cursed through ritual. According to the story passed down through generations, the chest had once been involved in a dispute between two families. Someone seeking revenge allegedly placed a spell on the object so that misfortune would follow whoever possessed it. Eventually, the chest was removed from the family home and donated to the Kentucky Historical Society. The decision was partly practical. The family no longer wanted the object near them, but they also believed it should not simply be destroyed. By placing it in a historical collection, they hoped the chest would remain contained in a place where it could be studied, rather than feared. Today, the Conjured Chest is preserved as part of the museum's archive of regional folklore. Historians describe it as a cultural artifact, representing the strong traditions of Appalachian belief in curses, protective magic, and spiritual conflict. From a scholarly perspective, the chest provides insight into how communities once explained unexplained illness, family tragedy, and personal misfortune. But even within the museum environment, the chest has never been treated like an ordinary exhibit. It is rarely placed in prominent display areas, and many visitors only learn about it through written records rather than direct viewing. Some staff members describe the object as an important historical story. Others quietly admit that it still carries an atmosphere that makes people uncomfortable when standing near it for too long. Whether the Conjured Chest was ever truly cursed is impossible to prove, but the object reveals something important about the way people react to certain artifacts. Once a community believes an object has been deliberately marked with harm, that belief can follow the object for generations. And sometimes, even when the object ends up inside a museum, the question people continue asking is the same one the original owners asked more than a century ago. What if the safest place for a cursed object is not to destroy it, but to keep it locked somewhere no one will try to open it again? The Black Prince's Ruby. Inside the British imperial state crown sits a large red gemstone that has witnessed some of the most violent chapters of European history. It is known as the Black Prince's Ruby, although gemologists later discovered it is not actually a ruby at all. It is a red spinel. But the name remained, along with a darker reputation, tied to the stone's long journey through war, betrayal, and royal bloodshed. The story begins in the 14th century in the Kingdom of Granada. The stone was originally owned by Abu Sa'id, a Muslim ruler in southern Spain. His power, however, became the target of political ambition. According to historical accounts, Abu Sa'id was murdered by a rival who seized the jewel as part of the conquest. From the very beginning, the gemstone entered history through violence. The stone later came into the possession of Don Pedro of Castile, a king whose reign was filled with brutal conflict. Pedro was known for his ruthlessness and for eliminating rivals who threatened his rule. During a civil war against his own half-brother, he sought help from Edward of Woodstock, the English prince known to history as the Black Prince. As payment for military support, Pedro gave the large red gemstone to Edward. From that moment, the stone entered English royal history. But its presence continued to follow battlefields rather than peaceful courts. The Black Prince wore the stone into combat during the 100 Years' War. After his death, it passed through generations of English kings. One of the most famous moments in its history occurred during the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, when King Henry V wore the gem on his battle helmet. During the battle, Henry was struck on the head by an axe. The blow destroyed part of his helmet, but missed his skull by a small margin. The stone itself survived the impact. Henry survived the battle as well, though historians later described the strike as dangerously close to ending his life. Over the centuries, the stone continued to appear in moments connected to royal conflict. It passed through turbulent reigns, wars of succession, and political upheaval. Unlike many jewels that symbolize wealth or beauty, this stone seemed to appear repeatedly in situations where power was being fought for rather than peacefully inherited. Today, the Black Prince's Ruby sits in the imperial state crown, used in British coronation ceremonies. Millions of visitors see the crown displayed behind protective glass each year. To historians, the gem is simply an artifact of medieval politics and royal tradition. But when investigators trace its history, a different pattern becomes difficult to ignore. The stone rarely appears in quiet moments of royal life. Instead, it appears during the moments when kings are fighting hardest to keep their thrones. The question surrounding the Black Prince's Ruby is not whether the stone itself carries supernatural power. It is whether certain objects become permanently linked to violence simply because of the history that surrounds them. If an artifact passes through enough battles, assassinations, and betrayals, it begins to feel less like a jewel and more like a witness that has watched power destroy every ruler who tried to hold on to it. The Belcourt Cursed Chair. Belcourt Castle in Newport, Rhode Island, was built in 1894 by Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont. The mansion was designed as a lavish summer residence filled with rare artifacts, medieval armor, and antique furniture collected from Europe. Among these items was a simple wooden chair that would later gain a strange reputation among those who encountered it. Unlike many objects displayed in historic houses, this chair did not attract attention because of beauty or craftsmanship. It became known for something far more unsettling. Visitors and staff began reporting unusual reactions after sitting in it. Some described a sudden feeling of dizziness or nausea. Others claimed they felt as if they were being pushed or forced out of the seat by an invisible pressure. Over time, the chair became known locally as the Belcourt Cursed Chair. According to accounts repeated by guides and former caretakers of the mansion, the strange reactions were particularly common among women. Several visitors reportedly felt sudden pain or emotional distress after sitting in the chair. Some stood up almost immediately, describing the sensation that something in the seat did not want them there. At first, these reports were treated as imagination or suggestion. Historic buildings often create strong psychological responses, especially in rooms filled with antique objects and dim lighting. But the number of similar experiences slowly built a reputation around the chair that staff could not ignore. Eventually, the decision was made to move the chair out of normal seating areas and treat it strictly as a display object. The chair itself carries no official record of a curse. Historians believe it may have originated from a European estate, though the exact history of its ownership remains unclear. What makes the story persist is not a documented tragedy, but the consistency of reactions reported by different people. Visitors who had never heard the legend sometimes described the same uneasy sensation when sitting in the chair. That detail became the most disturbing part of the story. If someone expects a haunted object to cause fear, their reaction can be explained by psychology. But when people react before hearing the story, the explanation becomes less simple. Belcourt Castle itself has long been associated with unusual stories. The mansion contains hundreds of antique artifacts collected from across Europe. Some of these items were once part of castles and estates that disappeared long ago. When objects travel through centuries of unknown ownership, they often carry histories that are difficult to fully reconstruct. Today, the chair is rarely used for demonstrations or interactive exhibits. It remains part of the castle's collection, but most visitors see it only as another piece of historic furniture. Yet the story surrounding it continues to circulate among those familiar with the building. Because the most uncomfortable detail about the Belcourt chair is not that people believe it is cursed. It is that many of the people who reacted to it had never heard the story before sitting down. And the moment they did, they stood up immediately, as if the chair itself had asked them to leave. James Dean's little bastard, Porsche. On September 30th, 1955, actor James Dean was driving his silver Porsche 550 Spider along a highway in California. The car carried a nickname painted across its rear body, Little Bastard. Dean was only 24 years old and already becoming one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. That afternoon, his car collided with another vehicle at an intersection. The crash killed him almost instantly. The accident alone would have made the car famous. But what happened after the wreck transformed the Porsche into one of the most infamous cursed objects of the modern era. After the crash, the remains of the Porsche were purchased by a custom car designer named George Barris. Barris intended to use the damaged vehicle as a teaching tool to demonstrate the dangers of high-speed driving. The wrecked car was transported to a garage for storage. According to early reports, the strange incidents began almost immediately. While unloading the wreck, the car reportedly slipped and crushed the legs of a mechanic working nearby. Soon after, 2 doctors purchased parts from the destroyed vehicle to install in their own racing cars. One of them later died in a racing accident when the engine taken from Dean's Porsche failed during a competition. The other driver survived a crash after the car suddenly lost control. The pattern continued as different pieces of the vehicle were removed and reused. Tires from the Porsche were installed on another race car. During a later event, those tires reportedly blew out at the same time, causing the driver to crash. The damaged shell of the car was later used in a highway safety exhibition tour. During one display event, the vehicle reportedly slipped from its support stand and injured another spectator. At one point, the car was placed on a truck for transport to another exhibition. According to reports from the time, the truck caught fire during the journey. The truck was destroyed, but the remains of the Porsche reportedly survived the blaze with little damage. The incidents created a growing reputation that the wrecked vehicle itself carried a curse. Newspapers began referring to the Porsche as a dangerous artifact that brought misfortune to anyone who tried to use parts from it. Eventually, the remains of the car disappeared while being transported between exhibitions. The truck carrying the wreck arrived at its destination, but the Porsche was gone. No official explanation was ever confirmed. The vehicle simply vanished from record. Today, no one knows exactly where the remains of James Dean's Porsche are located. Skeptics argued that the stories surrounding the car are a combination of coincidence, exaggeration, and the dramatic attention given to a celebrity tragedy. Accidents happen frequently in racing and mechanical testing, but investigators studying the story continue to focus on one detail. Every time someone tried to reuse or display part of the wrecked car, another accident seemed to follow. And in the end, the object itself disappeared, as if the most dangerous artifact in the story did not belong in a museum, but was never meant to remain in the world at all. Conclusion. Across museums, private collections, and royal vaults, thousands of historical objects are preserved as pieces of human history. Most of them are studied, cataloged, and displayed without controversy, but a small number of artifacts exist in a strange category that historians rarely discuss openly. These are objects that carry reputations powerful enough to change the way people interact with them. The cases in this investigation reveal a consistent pattern. The objects themselves are not always extraordinary. A painting, a chair, a doll, a gemstone, a wooden chest, even a destroyed sports car. None of these items should logically possess any influence beyond their physical form. Yet over time, each of them became associated with events that made people hesitate before touching them again. In some cases, the fear came from repeated accidents that seemed too closely linked to ignore. In others, the object triggered reactions that many different people described in almost identical ways. Museums and collectors often respond to these stories cautiously. The artifacts are not destroyed because they remain historically valuable, but they are sometimes placed behind glass, stored in restricted archives, or handled under conditions that quietly acknowledge the reputation surrounding them. Skeptics argue that cursed objects are nothing more than folklore. Human beings are naturally drawn to patterns, even when those patterns are coincidence. When an artifact already carries a dramatic history, every new accident connected to it strengthens the legend. Over time, the story becomes more powerful than the object itself. But there is another possibility investigators cannot completely dismiss. Objects travel through human history in ways people rarely consider. They pass through moments of violence, death, ritual, and belief. They move from owner to owner, sometimes across centuries. Every generation adds its own story to the artifact's history. Eventually, the object becomes something more than a physical item. It becomes a container of memory, fear, and meaning. And once that transformation happens, the question changes. The real mystery may not be whether these objects are cursed. The real mystery is why so many different people, across different times and places, keep reacting to certain artifacts in exactly the same way. Because if these objects truly hold nothing unusual at all, why do museums sometimes lock them away instead of placing them proudly on display? And more importantly, how many other artifacts might already be sitting quietly inside museum archives, carrying reputations that the public has never been told about?